for the fourth session of Futurescapes. So today we have for you Pratyusha Varadi. And before I sort of introduce her, I'd like to say a couple of words about ADI. ADI is Associations of Designers of India. We're a association that's committed to promoting the best practices in design in India. And if you'd like to find out more, please log on to www.adi.org.in. And you can also log on to Instagram and you can find us there. Our tag is adi.community. There you'll find all the updates on our latest events and activities. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. So Pratyusha is an industrial designer and she's got a background in electronics engineering. She is the co-founder of NemoCare. NemoCare is a medtech startup that focuses on neonatal care, and they have recently developed a patented IoT-enabled wearable for newborns that continuously monitors necessary vital parameters like apnea, hypothermia, and other distress conditions. So it basically monitors vitals and sees if these and detects if these conditions are and helps doctors through that. So today she's going to be talking about the COVID scenario and also reimagining sort of the future of the role of design in the medtech arena. And without further delay, I sort of hand it over to you, Pratyusha.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here. And thank you, Adarsh, for that lovely introduction. Should I just jump in and start the talk, or are we waiting for more?
Sure. I think we can.
Okay.
We can share the screen. I think people will keep joining. We've got a lot of registrations. So, yeah.
So today I'll be talking, so predominantly for the last 9 years or so, I've been working mainly in the area of medical technology, designing products, designing technologies, working closely with biomedical engineers and doctors, patients, and have been working in the area of designing better experiences, better user experiences to enhance the quality of care that patients receive. So when we're talking about that, primarily, when we look at medtech industry in general, we have to imagine the two users. One is, so it's always the two people that you're designing for. One is the clinicians, the healthcare workers, and the patients. So that is the first challenge when you start designing for medtech, because empathizing with two different kinds of users who have completely different needs is the primary challenge that is opposed to any designer working in this field. So today I'll be talking about how we've been seeing the world change in front of our eyes in the last 18 months or so, and it has presented unprecedented humanitarian crisis to our country, and not just medtech industry, but every aspect of life has been changing a lot. It is completely different from what we know. And as a startup, as a designer in the medtech industry, and predominantly also a person who runs a business here in this area, we have faced not one, but many, quite a few challenges. But today I'm here to talk about the lessons that can be taken from that, mainly for us as designers, mainly for us as business owners, and how we can implement or start, learning from those lessons as we move forward. And this is also, so I think why it's important to talk about this, let me start with that actually, why it's important to talk about post-pandemic era, or why it's important and imperative that we take lessons out of this situation that we're going through, is because going forward, though it's not going to be a clean slate, it is any crisis presents humanity two options: either you learn from it or you don't learn from it. So I think we as a generation have to belong to going forward, we have to belong to a sect of people who have learned from these mistakes, because it's not the mistakes, when there is a crisis that happens, it presents brilliant opportunities. I'm so sorry. I'm just trying to move forward. It's not allowing me to. Okay. So it presents beautiful opportunities for us to actually take away from them. When we're looking at, yes, of course, it has presented, it has created, it has disrupted livelihoods as we know, it has disrupted lives as we know, it has disrupted every aspect of every industry as we know. There have been many restrictions, many issues with related to livelihoods like jobs, and it has not just reflected on the industries like manufacturing and agriculture, but also on climate change as well. So going forward, what happens is, when we take lessons from here and go forward from there, is when we make that change that is necessary. It is not just the preparedness, but it is also for a better future. It is not future generations. So I think in terms of how COVID has affected in general, yes, but what it has done to us as consumers, especially people who, I'm talking again, I'll shift my focus completely in the medical and healthcare domain. When it comes to what, like I was saying, my users are two people. One is clinicians and the patients. So when you're talking about your consumers, when you're talking about your users, the paradigm shift that is happening towards their behavioral change is being massive. So one major change that has happened to consumers itself is hygiene. In terms of, we have always, as a society, as a culture, as Indian culture, we've always been very cognizant about hygiene in terms of, cleaning hands and being very particular about how we go about. But then now it has come to a point where I think it has mentally now just become part of your DNA to sort of always sanitize, and the entire your attitude towards hygiene is something that has taken a huge shift, and that I think it's reflecting in the way sanitizers are out of market, PPE kits are out of market right now, and we have faced such immense challenge with respect to procuring these even for our health. So that has changed quite. It's a huge shift that has happened. So when I'm talking about these paradigm shifts, I think one thing that what is going to lead to this is these paradigm shifts have actually presented the opportunities for us to take forward from. So what COVID has done, apart from doing all the damage that it has done, it has created a silver lining. It is basically created new care pathways, which I like to call in the most unprecedented pace. Moving at what is called, we have a favorite term for it. We call it the COVID speed. So when you're talking about when you're designing something with respect to technology, with respect to a certain kind of technology that you're using, for example, just our product, when we were designing the product, it was a basic vitals collecting monitor for newborns, and we were designing for a very niche population. So we had many challenges, but the biggest challenge we had at that time was the fact that remote monitoring, or a lot of people, Apple Watch or Fitbits were just about like probably 5% of the population is what uses it. But so patient data monitoring, patient data collection, and understanding that data and being able to give health insights based on that monitoring or the monitor data was something that, so when we started off with this work, it was about 5 years ago. We were basically designing a product that was supposed to, or we were hoping will come into adoption 10 years from there. So 5 years from now was when we thought, the market will be fully opened up for a product like that. But what we are seeing now is unprecedented in the way that every household has a pulse oximeter. I think 2 years ago, nobody would have imagined that every household would have a pulse oximeter. I think when I was talking about our device collects SpO2 data, which a pulse oximeter does. And when I was talking about SpO2 or oxygenation levels to people 2 years ago, I don't think anybody even had an idea. A lot of investors that I was speaking with, I still had to break it down and explain and say what oxygen levels are for a body and what it reflects as. So, but now I think everybody knows what SpO2 levels are. Everybody knows what oxygenation levels are. And this kind of data, this kind of knowledge, this kind of people understanding towards personal health monitoring was something that we as an industry had never imagined 2 years ago. So I think beyond the crisis, beyond everything, that I see as a silver lining, I see as an opportunity to what we are heading towards. And this actually presents as a clean slate, because not just from the consumer's point of view, but even from clinicians' point of view. I think when I was talking about how people will probably use our device to monitor their own children at home, doctors laughed at me 2 years ago. They said that's impossible, because we asked them to monitor temperature using a thermometer, and still people are, not so okay with it. But now I think the situation is completely different. So that I think is one of the major paradigm shifts that's happened in the industry, which both clinicians and consumers are not immune to. The other major user research insight that we had got, like when we are constantly on the field talking with doctors, and that's one of the things that you have to keep doing as a designer in the medical field. So one of the major issues that we had with doctors was more than consumers, more than people, more than patients, it's the doctors who are very, very resistant towards adoption of new technology. Yes, they like it. They like new technology aiding them in the way that they can deliver care. But with doctors, you see what happens is that they are accustomed to years of training. They go through 4 years of MBBS, then 3 years of post-graduation, and a couple of years of fellowships and training. And so that's about 10 years of education and training in a certain way. And when you ask them to change it, or when you ask them to adopt something new into their practice, especially because the risks are very high, their resistance towards that adoption is very, very, very high. So one of the hospitals that we had initially been working with was AIG before they shifted into their new campus here. The old campus, they had immense amount of patient flow, that the kind of volumes that they saw was so high at one point that so AIG had commissioned IIT Hyderabad. They were, technology partners for developing new technologies for them. And one of the discussions that had happened was to ease out the workflow for doctors, for helping them, helping them, or people used to come from all parts of the country, all parts of the world to see these doctors, and they would wait for days together because they wouldn't get an appointment. So one of the simple problems these doctors had was to be able to see more patients in a day, one thing. And second thing, to reduce the travel, because people were coming all the way. They used to come all the way from Kolkata in a train to come see the doctor and take the train back in the evening and go back. This was how they used to commute to see a doctor for a day, for one single consultation. So a simple problem, I mean, when you're thinking from a designer's point of view or a technologist's point of view, a simple solution to that problem was to enable remote consultation. And you wouldn't imagine the amount of resistance doctors had towards remote consultation 3-4 years ago. 4 years ago, doctors, unless they see a patient physically, would never be comfortable being able to diagnose anything. And that is still there today. But the problem is right in your face now. And the problem is with regards to your safety and with your family's safety. They have no other option but to adopt this now. Every doctor that we know, every patient that we know wants remote consultation. And this kind of paradigm shift is something that was unprecedented. I think something that this industry probably did not imagine would come 10 years, from couple of years back, and now it's already here, where we are seeing this sort of remote consultation and doctors being able to actually connect with patients from across the country and across the world. The fourth major thing that we had never seen people spending was preventative healthcare. Preventative healthcare just as a business. Just in terms of an idea, if you had gone to any investor with this idea a couple of years ago, I think would be something that they were not very comfortable with, because preventative healthcare is the most logical thing for all of us to be able to do, to be able to take care of us. But people just never spent money on it ever. And the way that is changing, and the way people are actually proactive towards preventative healthcare is actually now really heartwarming to see, and something that I think is a great opportunity for designers going forward. So in terms of how we are seeing this scatter, in terms of, yes, like I was just talking about, the behavioral change needed from doctors is usually higher than from patients themselves. So in terms of the resistance towards the adoption of technology, now we see that has actually opened up this entire space. So people are now much, much more open to remote patient monitoring. Remote patient monitoring was something that we typically saw in sci-fi movies at one point, and now it's a reality that I check my own SpO2, I check my own temperature, I make a chart, I note it down, and actually refer to a doctor or consult with a doctor over a telehealth app, and actually be able to consult and diagnose myself and take care of myself without even probably going to a hospital. So we are seeing that happen right in front of our eyes. Mental health and wellness apps have taken over the entire space. I think the crisis has presented this a huge opportunity where people are now starting to understand how important mental well-being is. The whole the AI-based predictive health and insights are picking up, like Deepak John Matthew was talking a couple of talks ago. AI is coming up. AI is, we've been talking about it for the longest time, but it's hard. It's so exciting for me as a product owner, as a product designer, to see how this technology is actually making difference to lives now. Because radiologists are the amount of HRCTs, the amount of CTs that are going through in a single day in any of these labs that you take in across the country, that is so high right now. And startups are actually cashing in on that, where we are able to actually give the Corad score based on the CTs. And the way radiology is transforming with respect to AI, it's unprecedented. It's something that we have not thought would happen so soon, but it's happening right now, and it's probably happening while you don't even know that it's happening to you. So it's great to see all of these opportunities that have opened up, and this space has opened up like never before.
Pratyusha, I'm so sorry. You've got on mute for some reason.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So because the space has opened up like this, it is so like with every yin yang situation, it has come up with a lot more challenges. But then I think what we can do collectively is to figure out these mitigation strategies. I don't think anybody single-handedly has figured it out. It's all evolving at the moment. It's all in the process of, in a place where what we do now, what we collectively do now, what we individually do now, how we target or tackle these situations is what is going to set the precedent for years to come in terms of in every aspect of design and every aspect of role that we can play. So when we are talking about, again, I'm going to shift my focus mainly to us as designers, how we are going to help the challenges that we are facing today. One of the primary challenge, like I was just talking about, how so much of digital health space has opened up and has presented opportunities for a lot more companies to come in and start playing around here. That has posed the biggest challenge possible right now for the way the user experience is going to be designed for this. So one of the key reasons why this adoption to technology is so low, especially with clinicians, is the fact that is because the kind of fatigue it brings in because everybody thinks a great EHR system, a great EHR actually helps the doctor see many patients. But when we go back and actually look at that data, a doctor has to spend 16 more minutes approximately on each patient to be able to use or to be able to consult that patient through an EHR system, a badly designed EHR system. So that is actually bringing in that fatigue, bringing in that unnecessary complication to the way the flow, the workflow has to be dealt with, and that is actually bringing many more challenges with respect to adoption. But now because the playing field is now actually clear. Now they have no other option but to adopt them because of the crisis that we are in. It is the biggest responsibility will fall on the UX and the UI designer to be able to actually simplify these workflows, to be able to provide, conduct precise user research and with challenging constraints so that they can actually deliver the best or develop the best design experiences for the caregivers and the patients and the healthcare workers. Because a badly designed app or a badly designed product or a user experience for the product is the break or break situation for things like this. And now they're trapped in a place where they cannot go backwards. They have to go forward with technology, and a badly designed user experience can actually be a hell for the care, especially the caregiver. So now another big challenge that we are starting to see is that the amount of data that is flowing through our system, just the healthcare system, it is, even without any of this technology, even without any of this digital health space opening up, we've seen that medical data itself is a mammoth to handle, especially for the patients, because the minute you start accumulating your patient file, let's say you have stayed in a hospital for about 15 days because of something that happened to you, just the amount of data that you will start to accumulate and to try to make sense of it is a mammoth of a task, because there is so much documentation. It is so haphazard. It is so poorly kept that it is just impossible to actually cut through the chase. So delivering simplified information without morphing the critical data, it is the huge challenge that we are going to start seeing now, because the amount of data that the patients themselves are going to be monitoring for themselves, are handling themselves, because there is no healthcare worker that is going to handhold you through this. And now that remote consultation and remote patient monitoring is going to be the norm in the near future, that data that they are going to start handling is going to be much more. So for us also, irrespective of all of this, for a simple product that we were designing, especially for newborns, the challenge was critical that, we had to give the right information to the parents and the right information to the doctor. You can always give the right information to the doctor. Doctor always wants to see the full picture. But when the user is a patient or a consumer, what happens is a kind of data that you're showing them is going to either be the make or break situation between, the fear and anxiety starts to build up and, it's going downhill from there, or it is just the right amount of data that they're able to take actionable steps to go forward and actually deal with the situation that they are in. So how you present that data, the baby is going through apnea, are you going to induce panic and fear in the parents, or are you going to actually give them the next critical step that they have to go through to get the right medical intervention? So how you're going to design that experience or how you're going to present that data is going to be centric to how medical technology experiences are going to roll out further down the line. So that again brings me to the next point, which says refrain from inducing anxiety. People are and will be going through a lot of their entire mental shift has been towards fear and anxiety, and the way they're dealing with this huge amount of unknown data, unknown medical terms that they are already dealing with, and trying to make sense of it is already inducing a lot more fear. But the way you're going to design these experiences going forward is how the adoption will take place. So I think, so the next important challenge that all of us as designers and technologists are going through in the current medtech industry is accelerated timelines. It has been weird actually to say that the way the entire system has slowed down thanks to the delays, the nightmarish situations that we are in with respect to how your team members are doing, and how your suppliers are doing, how your vendors are doing, how well there's so many aspects when you have to roll a product out, right from your designing right from your core team to how your clinical trials are going to roll out to how the product is actually going to you're going to design the go-to-market strategies. So, but right now, with the way that things are moving, especially in the medtech industry, it has worked the opposite direction. It is while other industries have slowed down quite a bit, accelerated timelines have taken center stage with respect to medical product development. And how are we trying to achieve it, especially with respect to diagnostics, PPE kits, and a lot of these other auxiliary products with respect to COVID have had to see accelerated timelines. But what is the beauty is the way the systems are being designed around how you can accelerate these timelines is actually you can call it the playbook. This is an important lesson that we can actually take forward, and all the unnecessary delays that we were dealing with respect to product development can actually be cut down. And this is an important lesson that we should be taking forward from here. So we have seen a lot of companies who are coming up with rapid iteration to arrive at a minimum viable product. Coming to MVP was something that a lot of startups struggle with. A lot of companies actually do a dilly-dally, and the way that they even if they're following lean systems, to reach an MVP is one of the toughest journey a startup has to take. But now the way that that we are able to use technologies like 3D printing, or now that everything has actually become remote and people are not traveling, people are becoming a little more innovative in the way that they can actually iterate to get to that MVP as fast as possible. Plan for interruptions. If one thing COVID has taught us is to see how many distractions and business interruptions can be caused by a single event that is completely out of our hands. I think everybody has contingency plans. Everybody has, some sort of plan A, plan B, plan C that, comes with product development. But I think the way that this has played out, the way last year has played out, is nothing short of a sci-fi movie. And I don't think anybody as a team has spent time to think of hypothetical situations that could probably happen only in movies. So now that this real life situation has actually presented to ourselves, it is important that you as a team take that time out to think about how to prepare for disruptions like this. Something is not going to come on time. Your production is not going to happen on time. Your parts are not going to come. Your raw material is not going to come on time. So there are so many interruptions that we don't take into consideration when we are going ahead with this, because we always have this lot of things that we have taken for granted. And now it's a good way to now actually start planning, because a lot of things cannot be taken granted at the moment, including Indo-China war. I don't know when that will break out, but it might just, So another key thing that a lot of designers who are working in the medtech space who are not very cognizant, I personally find a lot of such people who think regulatory issues are not their cup of tea. It's something that a different team has to manage. But be smart about your regulatory issues, being cognizant about the kind of regulatory issues that you will bump into and how you can actually work around the system. Where do you lie? Where you as a company or you as a product your use cases and your your exact goals that you have set for your product, keeping them in mind and working around the system and being smart about these regulatory issues can be all the difference that it will make to having an accelerated timeline. We as a country, generally, we have a very complex regulatory landscape, especially when it comes to medical device industry. We are so nascent that just to kind of figure out your first step can take a long time. And if you're even looking at FDA and other sort of regulatory issues, in a matured ecosystem, it's actually much more easier to navigate, though it's a longer process and time taking and investment heavy. But actually knowing your ways to work around the system and being smart about it can actually help you accelerate that product development timeline. The fourth and the most important aspect that we all have learned through this crisis is to be able to support your team, irrespective of how you're doing individually, irrespective of how you're doing as a company. You might be sinking, you might be heading into bankruptcy, or whatever your team, you're keeping your morale high, keeping and supporting your team can, because especially now that you're not going to be together for, I don't know how long, this is probably something that we have to get used to forever, but being able to support your team through this product development process, to be able to personally being able to connect with them on any personal issues that they might be having, and taking that time out to be able to make that call or make that message happen can make a lot of difference for your timelines. The last aspect of product development, or the challenge that I'm going to be talking about, and personally something that we as a company have faced, are still trying to overcome, and something that any hardware product, which is not very talked about, because generally we as a country don't like hardware products, but this is a major right now with respect to manufacturing and supply chain. So there's another company, another startup that we know of in medtech space, very smartly. So they were making glucose strips for the home glucometer for monitoring your glucose at home. They were the company that was predominantly sticking to that. And when COVID hit and suddenly the market went topsy-turvy, they had this huge workforce that was working with them, and they had to sustain the business. They had to keep this team going, and they had to pay out these guys, and they still had to be relevant to the market. Very smartly, the existing manufacturing infrastructure that they have, the vendor partner that they had, they quickly turned around and started developing the swabs that they used to test for your RT-PCR. I think this is one of the very smart moves that most of the startups, most of the companies have very innovatively pivoted. So cross-functional, cross-domain collaboration, looking outside your zone, looking outside your respective area, looking outside your comfort zone. This is all about surviving, sustaining, and floating through till you find your ground. And this is what a lot of companies started doing within our country too. A lot of people have taken advantage, especially when in the initial few days, there was this huge rush for 3D, for ventilators and CPAP machines, and oxygen masks were in short supply. 3D additive manufacturing, people started 3D printing these oxygen masks, and they've done so. They've done so beautifully. We as a country are, I must say, we are so restrictive. We're so not so up there with respect to manufacturing. We are very limited resources that we can operate in, especially hardware companies within the country have a tough time finding vendors, and especially in the initial days of batch manufacturing, have so many more challenges with respect to manufacturing. But they've all pivoted, and they've all made the maximum of what was available to us at that point. And these were the opportunities that started coming by. I think I've not seen 3D printing being used in medtech industry as much as it has been used last year. So that sort of flexibility with your manufacturing, having plan A, plan B, plan C, having contingencies within your manufacturing process and assembly lines is a huge thing that you can do. It's a huge step that you can take with respect to how you are going about planning for your manufacturing. The existing manufacturing system. So people started, a lot of EV companies we started seeing were, turning towards manufacturing of ventilators. A lot of automobile companies were lending a helping hand because these were established assembly lines, and for them, they have to keep running, and they have to. It's up to us about how innovative we can go, how innovative we can be about finding a vendor who you would have never imagined otherwise would be, developing any medical technology or manufacturing anything medtech. Being able to repurpose something, assembly lines which are already set like that, to be able to use for yourself is I think how innovatively we can go about making this possible. And one of the biggest lessons that we've all learned, like we've always taken everything for granted. It's a grave reality that we cannot manufacture a battery or lithium-ion battery in this country. So with respect to anything that we require, with respect to even making the smallest pulse oximeter here, we rely on China to be able to give us to rely on battery. If we need a battery, we have to go to China. That is a situation that we have in this country right now. But I think the biggest lesson that hit not just us, not just our country, but then across the world, is to be able to diversify and establish these alternative supply chains. So Japan has invested recently 2.2 billion into developing manufacturing clusters, not just within China, but outside. So, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, lot of third world countries, lot of developing countries is stepping up to this challenge, where truly, I think it's a time to be Atmanirbhar, not just for us, but for all of these smaller countries which have the potential to become manufacturing hubs. And we as a country have great potential. We have somehow never tapped into it. The wheels have started rolling, but I hope soon we'll get there where we can be self-reliant with respect to, at least for a little bit. I don't think any country completely on its own can become self-reliant with respect to manufacturing, but diversifying those clusters and not just relying on one single country is going to be the greatest learning that we will be taking away as manufacturing companies, I think, post-COVID. So with that, I come to an end, but one of an interesting conversation that I did not cover in this presentation, I was having this conversation with a doctor recently. I said, if you really require or looking forward to see something in products, design something in products post this pandemic, and this is one doctor who's been fighting in the front lines, has been managing ICUs which are overflowing with 100 patients. And I asked him what could be that one insight, what could be that one input that you could give us, which will help, tackling something like this if it comes again. What should we have done? He said, very simply, he said, if there is a way to design for people's stupidity, that should be put in. Because somehow we just don't seem to understand that staying at home is important. And no matter what we design, we still have to consider the fact that there are no dumb products, there are no dumb people, it's only the products and the systems that are being dumb. And we have to still consider designing for those. So that being said, it's an important message that we have to take away. Stay home, stay safe. It's not the same right now outside, and doctors are fighting to keep their heads above the water right now, and it's our duty to stay home and take care of ourselves and our family. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that lovely talk. So I'll just jump into some questions. So there are some questions that we had. One question was, you spoke about data a lot, yes. How we're collecting a lot of data and processing it is such a big sort of a task. One question that we are seeing all around the world is about data sovereignty, right? Like who owns the data? So when a data is generated from a device, sort of who owns it from a personal level to a city level to a state level to a national level. So what are some of your sort of views on that, and how you as a company are dealing with something like that?
It's a very important, very burning question, I think, not just for us, but a lot of policymakers across the world. And a lot of the aspects around that questions haven't been figured out yet, to be very, very frank with you. But the point is, honestly, at this point, nobody owns data. Even if you own the servers through which the data is running, nobody owns the data except for yourself. You own your health data. At the point, that is the basic core value on which any of these policies are being built. But at the moment, in terms of how, who owns the data with respect to a country or with respect to a certain system, I don't think anybody owns that data. Nobody has the right. I mean, privacy is something that is going to be a very, very high priority thing that people will have to start taking care of, which I think any telehealth company right now, we are rolling out at a very fast pace and nobody's really looking into it. And we as a country have not many policies designed around it, except for the fact that our servers should not be offshore. All the data that's running through our servers have to be on the shore. That is the only, in terms of policy that we have with respect to medical data. But otherwise, most of the telehealth or most of the digital health companies that are functioning right now are following the guidelines for HIPAA, which is, HIPAA guidelines are being followed, but nobody has any, we as a country do not have a certification yet, which we have to adhere to particularly. But I think as the policies get built, like I was saying, the privacy has to be designed into most of these health systems that we are going forward in designing. But the core value is, except for you, nobody owns your health data. Nobody should own your health data.
Yeah. We have a question from Michael. What should we consider for designing a telehealth product for remote India?
Okay. Yeah, that's a big monster. That's the big monster everybody wants to tackle. So India is many countries in one country, like we all know. When you are designing an app, a telehealth app for India, one thing that you have to kind of understand is when you go from east to west, it is going to have so many changes that will have to be built into it that it is very difficult to roll out. But that being said, people are still being able to roll out these products. One of the important things that we have started to see is having vernacular languages built into your app can be of great help. This is one thing that we have realized with our own company, that the way, so for example, vernacular, if you're content heavy, if you're a telehealth app which is content heavy, which is able to give instructions and for people to be able to follow those instructions, having vernacular languages greatly helps. But that again is a very big scaling issue. But it's something that you have to invest into, especially if you have to design for remote India. But that being said, if you have a great UI, for example, WhatsApp is not, in vernacular language. It still has, if your goal or if your goal of your remote telehealth app is very simple, then having a great UI is, I think, the challenge that you can actually, that the magic key that you can use to open this up. Because, for example, I think a lot of people who can't type in English are now using the speak button in WhatsApp and, relaying their messages across. So something as simple as that, if you're able to use the user experience and the user interface designed for them properly, I think it's an important step forward. Yeah.
So guys, please keep putting your questions in the chat box. So we have one more question saying, how did you get into designing for medical equipment or like medical medtech? Like, how did you get into it?
Okay, so
like, what was your?
I think it was meant for me to have to get there. But so when I was born, my mother wanted me to be a gynecologist because she's one. That's how it started. But the rebellious child in me, which is always doing something that opposite to what my parents told me, was something that kept me going. I took up engineering, and then once I was done with, okay, this is what engineering has for me, and then I went into product design. When I went to NID, it was interesting because NID just suddenly opened up this huge gamut of experiences that we could go through, and there were so many things. I thought, okay, this is the holy grail. When I took up product design, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and oh, this is great. It's shown me the direction of my life. But then the minute that happened, I started to realize that within product design, the what do you do, what do you hope to do, what do you want to do, what do you hope to achieve is something. Even trying to figure that out 3 years at NID is not enough. But incidentally for me, I think one of the systems design classes with MP Ranjan was I think the turning episode for me. He pushed us into exploring healthcare, because I was sitting in his office and I was talking about all this experience I had as a child growing up, in a hospital, because my mom was a doctor and she was a gynecologist, and growing up in that hospital environment, how it shaped a lot of the things that I think about. And when I was talking about this, he pushed us into this thing saying, why don't you look at maternal health? And very weirdly, it so happened that he said, okay, just write to the health commissioner and say that I want to go and see the maternal health state in Gujarat. And we just wrote a letter. I don't know what guts, we just went in and gave that letter to the health commissioner. And the next few days later, we had a car that came us, picked us up, and made us tour 5 different districts in Gujarat. And that experience of understanding rural maternal health, I don't know how much it made a difference for me as a systems design project, but as a person, as a turning episode for my life, because it was a world that I did not see. I only came from a place where I thought healthcare was affordable. I've seen people buy healthcare. I've seen people pay and, get what they wanted and demand a certain thing from a doctor and get it for themselves. But when I saw people being vulnerable and not being able to make a choice, I think that was what shook me up so much. And there was this underbelly where healthcare systems across the world, especially in developing countries, are designed to exclude this population, exclude pregnant women, exclude neonates, exclude old people. The healthcare system is designed to exclude them. And the minute when I worked closely with those systems was when I realized this is something that I wanted to do. And it was a hard way around, because the minute, if you look at healthcare and you enter corporate healthcare, it's a completely different ball game. But trying to be able to do what I thought would make a difference, I had to find my own paths. So I did a fellowship at IIT Hyderabad after that, and this was a fellowship in healthcare entrepreneurship, and this presented us with an opportunity to actually work closely with doctors, work closely with systems at various levels, the healthcare systems at various levels, to be able to discover what I wanted to do, and something that I thought would make a difference. And the minute that happened, and we were able to actually develop an MVP, we got funded by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and that kind of kept us going. And so I've been in this field for so far.
Yeah, perfect. So I think I will just take one final sort of question. You talked about hardware a lot, right? Like hardware development. And one thing that we do see is that there's a lack of prototyping facilities and also like hardware development facilities. So do you think that we are there yet, or are we doing enough? For example, I know that in Hyderabad, they are setting up a few facilities that are there for prototyping. So do you think we're doing enough to encourage hardware startups?
It's not enough. It's definitely not enough, because there has been a lot of effort though. In the the first time when we started prototyping, the situation about 5 to 6 years ago to now is very different. You have a lot of clusters or ecosystems that have come up, which can help you prototype, and there has been heavy funding into that. But there's still some amount of red tapeism that happens there, and in terms of how you get into any of those facilities and being able to use those facilities to be able to develop your prototype. Especially with respect to Bangalore and Hyderabad, there has been a lot of activity. There has been TSIC, IIC has developed their own, makers. Maker space sort of, a lot of these spaces have come up, definitely. They've been associated with institutes, or they've been associated with any biotechnology clusters that have come up within the city. So that kind of gives you a long process to actually enter one of these systems to be able to develop your product. So definitely it's not enough. There's a lot more to go, but there is a lot of I hope private funding comes into. So whatever is running right now is mainly running on government funding, or under government policies to become Atmanirbhar and things like that. But if there is a lot more private funding, I think we can start seeing the difference that starts happening. Because there are countries, that there are cities in this world where every little block has a maker space. UK, even in something like Scotland, and I was living in a remote town called Dundee. Dundee had 3 or 4 maker spaces in every block around. So that sort of funding, either through government or from private players, will actually see a lot more with respect to prototyping. Yeah.
I think
Adi, I think you're stuck. Yeah.
So I think I heard him say that this was the last question. Okay, Adarsh, please.
Adarsh, you're back.
Yeah. Looks like connection is not good. So Pratyusha, thank you so much for joining in.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for having me. Hopefully that talk helped.
It was really, really insightful. Thank you very much. For everyone who's in, thank you so much for joining in today. And if you're not a member of ADI, you can log on to adi.org.in to become a member. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.